Okay, so hello everyone, so I'm carrying on reviewing Empire of Normality now, so we're on to the next video. He says, capitalism always has a neurological in-group and an out-group. He says the boundaries of which shift in relation to the perceived productive potential. Seems a bit simplistic to me, I don't really see that myself. Neurological in-group and out-group. Essentially, capitalism just values people who are not disabled. That's all I can say about that. But that's always been the case. But that isn't kind of unique to capitalism, like most systems value those who aren't disabled. So far, at least. He says it's also harmful to get in-group, as it positions them as workers to be exploited until they finally become neurodivergent through burnout, illness, or cognitive decline. What does that mean? Finally become neurodivergent. What does he mean by that? Well, I don't like the word neurodivergent anyway. If he's talking about serious neurodevelopmental disorders, particularly the ones of a pervasive variety, then no, those are not something you acquire. He says, either capitalism... I mean, clearly, obviously, it depends what you mean by neurodivergence. Hate that word. I mean, technically, you could say, well, dementia is neurodivergent. But, yeah, I mean, if he's talking about acquired varieties, but... Anyway. He says, either capitalism values us, makes us workers to exploit, or devalues us, making us disabled and a surplus. Like I said before, capitalism does not make us disabled. We are disabled. I'm not denying, by the way, that certain capitalist practices might in and of themselves disable someone, but generally speaking, you are disabled because you're disabled, and it actually doesn't really have anything to do with the system, but it's just the system makes it worse, or rather, makes it harder for you to deal with your disability. It doesn't actually cause the disability. Making us disabled, and then he says, so again, you become a surplus. He says, for example, long COVID may find themselves neurodivergent and disabled, or they might temporarily shift to the surplus, for example, with burnout. He says, neurotypicality is a temporary phase for any individual. I don't agree with him there insofar as there's no such thing as neurotypical. That's all I'll say about that. Like, neurotypical is a silly term invented by neurodiversity academics that means nothing. There's no such thing as neurotypical because no brain is typical. Everyone's brain is different. But we can safely say there are brains that are considered kind of normal. That's to say they don't have any handicap. You know what I mean? I don't need to spell it out, it's kind of obvious. People get offended by these terms, I do not care. There are brains that are basically normal. And normal is a very wide term. Of course, there's a lot of variety within normal. There's a lot of diversity, all brains are diverse. But there's diversity within normality. That's what's often called neurotypical, but neurotypical doesn't exist because no brain is typical. But there is a kind of a broad category of normality within which there's a lot of diversity. Or typicality, you could call it. I mean, I'm kind of splitting hairs here, really, semantics. But you know what I mean. And then there are people whose brains are blatantly abnormal because they're not actually adaptively functioning how they should optimally for a human being. That's to say, if you find it hard to socialise to a severe pathological extent, combined with all the other symptoms of autism, that is not adaptive for a human being. That is not the optimal scenario. You are abnormal. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong Or like, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's simply stating that you are abnormal. It's just nature. Nature throws out shit. Some people have diabetes or heart disease. That's abnormal too. It's, you know what I mean? There's no value judgment here. That's abnormal to have heart disease. It's abnormal to have diabetes. You're not functioning optimally for a human being. Your body is letting you down. My brain is letting me down. My brain is abnormal. When I say a normal brain, I don't mean that there's all brains are the same, or that there's no diversity within normal brains. Everyone's brain is different. I'm talking about the fact that yes, all brains are different, but a normal brain is one that functions optimally for a human being. It is pretty straightforward when you think about it. They complicate stuff, these politically correct neurodiversity advocates. There's no such thing as normal. Of course there bloody is. You know, stop complicating matters. Anyway, moving on. So, I mean, you know normal when you see it, right? And having mental illness is not normal either. Anyone who has a mental illness is abnormal by definition. That's why there's a book called Abnormal Psychology. There is normal psychology and there's abnormal psychology. He says, both neurodivergent and neurotypical, he says, is a matter of proximity to a norm that changes in line with changes in the means of production. Okay. And then he talks about the Soviet Union, and he talks about how the Soviet Union took a form called state capitalism. Yeah, because the Soviet Union it technically wasn't actually communist, they just used the word communist. Actual communism, there's never actually been a communist society, it's always remained an ideal, a utopia. He said Marx had seen communism as requiring a withering away of the state and workers in control of their own workplaces. He said the workspaces of the Soviet Union were state-controlled. And he said Lenin saw this as a brief stage, but Stalin made it permanent. I don't think... Yeah, I won't go into it, but I'm a socialist, not a communist, but anyway, that's a different debate. And then he talks about, he says the emphasis on production was continued in Soviet Russia, so the emphasis on production was continued. He says there was still an emphasis on competition, although this time competition with capitalists. He says alienation was maintained, and he says the physician class